What is up, you guys? My name is Roman, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. And today, I'm going to be reacting to SpaceGodzilla Kaiju Profile Redux by Wikizilla. Now, Wikizilla does amazing kaiju profile videos, and they they tend and this is a Redux video, so this is a remake of one of their older profiles because they already did this profile in SpaceGodzilla. To my memory, it was a decent video, so I don't see why they could redo it, but they've redone a lot of their videos over the years. I guess because some of them haven't aged well, or maybe just because there's more information they need to tell. But either way, make sure you go subscribe to them. I'll link it below, and let's get started.
After striking a deal with TriStar Pictures in the fall of 1992 that granted the studio the rights to produce an American Godzilla movie with a worldwide release slated for the fall of '94, Toho considered bringing the Versus series of Godzilla movies to an end with its follow-up to Godzilla vs. Mothra. However, as the Sony-backed Hollywood production faced delays while in search of a director, the folks at Toho decided they could put out at least one more installment in their series after Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. While the previous entries,
But eventually that became two more because Godzilla vs. Destroyer was made, and that was the last film of the Heisei era. So Space Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla is the second to last, the penultimate.
post Biolante focused on renewing the popular monsters of the past, Godzilla 6 quickly landed on having the King of the Monsters fight a new opponent, a mirror image of himself birthed by the void. Hey Kaiju fans, I'm Taichanalante, and today we're looking at the BioQuartz monster from the darkness, SpaceGodzilla.
Space Godzilla.
Godzilla's penultimate foe in the Heisei series, and the only alien creature introduced therein, SpaceGodzilla is a clone of the King of...
Wait, there. Oh yeah, that's true. Forgot because Ghidorah is not an alien in the Heisei era. So yeah, technically, Space Godzilla is the only alien creature Godzilla fights in the Heisei series.
the monsters spawned by G-cells cast into outer space in the aftermath of his battles with either Biolante or Mothra, which were swallowed by a black hole and exposed to the radiation from a supernova. Boasting an array of gravitational powers and cosmic energy attacks, along with his ability to generate and utilize crystals in various ways, Space Godzilla's malice is driven by an instinctive hatred for his progenitor, whose depiction as a morally neutral, neither good nor evil, force of nature he contrasts. Making his way to Earth of his own free will, unlike the typically mind-controlled kaiju pawns of yore, Mothra's Cosmos warned the monster sought to eliminate his Earthling counterpart so the planet would be rendered defenseless against his conquest.
Design.
With the American Godzilla delayed, Toho Pictures' planning department solicited ideas for the 21st Godzilla movie, ultimately receiving submissions from 25 different people. From among the few pitches that have been mentioned publicly, Godzilla vs. Cthulhu certainly stands out, and previously considered concepts such as Mecha Mothra and a Heisei King Kong were also suggested. Chief among these stories was one involving Emperor Ghidorah,
Not gonna lie, a Mecha Mothra does sound pretty dope. I would enjoy that.
aka Kaiser Ghidorah, a distinct individual from the lower-ranked King Ghidorah in 1991's Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, closer in origin to the Showa incarnation. While this new Ghidorah got rejected, reportedly because the kaiju would be too similar to Yamata no Orochi from Toho's upcoming tokusatsu fantasy feature Orochi the Eight-Headed Dragon,
Oh yeah.
the concept of an extraterrestrial kaiju gained a foothold. Before the new year had even arrived, assistant producer Shinichiro Arimasa and producer Shogo Tomiyama had put together a proposal which introduced the concept of Godzilla's enemy being an alien clone of him begat by G-cells cast into outer space. Even the name Space Godzilla was on paper by this point. This version of the story featured an army of giant alien dragonflies controlled by Space
Oh,
Godzilla, who
wow.
had ice-based powers and was described as being purely white in color and possessing huge wings. Shinji Nishikawa
So that kind of alien dragonflies. That kind of sounds like the plot of Godzilla versus Megaguirus. So was that carried over from this? I wonder if it was.
made several sketches of a traditional-looking Space Godzilla sporting enormous wing-shaped dorsal fins, with a four-armed version done by Studio OX and a couple of Ultra Kaiju-looking designs pitched in by Yoshiyuki Kasuya. At this stage, Space Godzilla also had the ability to telepathically control other life forms, and would use this power to take control of Miki Saigusa and Little Godzilla. Shinichiro Kobayashi, writer of Godzilla vs. Biolante's original story, submitted a draft titled Godzilla vs. Neo Godzilla, which built on this concept, but tweaked the origin of Godzilla's alien clone, here called Crystal Godzilla, adding living minerals into the equation and giving him a stretchable, crystalline body. Kobayashi supplied concept art as well, endowing the monster with prominent, prismatic shoulders which could morph into massive wings or grow to encase the entire body for spaceflight. Meanwhile, artist Haruhiko Mae asked if the theory that Mothra was the source for the G cells that gave rise to this new space monster was correct. Wouldn't the cells of Godzilla's other opponents have also ended up in the mix? Thus, he drew a full set of 7 forms for the extraterrestrial beast, taking on the shape of not just Godzilla, but Biolante Plant Beast and Flower Beast, King Ghidorah, and the larval Mothra and Batra, plus a spindly, skull-faced form somewhat reminiscent of a xenomorph.
Wow. That looks insane. It also kind of reminds me of that one scorpion monster that Mark Gatiss' character turned into in that one episode of Doctor Who. So crazy, so creepy.
It's common knowledge by now that Space Godzilla's decided design was derived from
Super.
Super Godzilla, the transformation of Godzilla featured in the Super Nintendo game of the same name.
That's right.
Minoru Yoshida designed both, originally creating Super Godzilla for the game, later retooling the look for Space Godzilla. Shinichi Wakasa created a clay model based on the design. Shigeaki Ito of Wakasa's company Monsters sculpted the prototype for the costume. The head and neck were initially more distinct from Godzilla's, but after special effects director Koichi Kawakita told him the face is still Godzilla's after all, Ito brought those elements closer in line with Godzilla's form. Staff from both Monsters and Replica played roles in the creation of the suit. Wakasa recalled in his 2017 book, King of Monster Maker, that the suit was originally going to be painted green, so the ventral side was done in yellow latex to match. In the end, a dark blue and reddish purple color scheme was used. The
Yeah, I like that better.
3-meter long tail was all one piece, and the shoulder crystals were removable. The detail of the exposed viscera in Space G's abdomen was added during the sculpting stage. It's not really there on the final concept art or clay maquette. Donning the suit was actor Ryo Hariya, who would go on to play Destoroyah's perfect form in the following film. At 60 or 70 kilograms, it was significantly lighter than the Godzilla suit, despite being larger overall.
Oh, wow.
Additionally, a motorized 1-meter-long model of Space Godzilla's flying mode was created by Replica, lined with over 60 crystals. Speaking of, several dozens of crystal towers of varying sizes were made, predominantly of fiber-reinforced plastic, and each lit up internally. For flying close-ups, the suit was simply put in front of a bunch of them. Turning our attention to the look of Space G himself, a couple of details lend credence to the hypothesized relation with Biolante, namely the similar midsections, the tusks erupting from the corners of the mouth,
Yeah.
and the shape of the neck. That said, the alien obviously looks more like his namesake, notably retaining external ears, the bridge of the nose, and an orange eye color. Sporting the same skin texture, he similarly got fan-shaped crystal clusters running down his back that taper into granules on the tail, which, divergently, is tipped with a thagomizer-like arrangement of crystals.
Origin.
Space Godzilla was born from Godzilla cells, which ended up in, you guessed it, outer space. As for the how, Two hypotheses are presented within Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. They originate either from cells which escaped orbit when Biollante disintegrated and subsequently scattered into the atmosphere in 1989, or from Mothra having inadvertently carried G cells into outer space following her battle with Godzilla in 1993, when she flew out there to intercept a meteor that was hurtling towards Earth. In any
Yeah, personally, I think I prefer the Biolante version of the origin a lot better because it just makes more sense. Like after Biolante drifted into space, her DNA, I don't know, it just seems a lot cooler to me than just Mothra having the cell on it, but still, even though it probably wouldn't make sense because there's also the time travel thing in Godzilla versus King Ghidorah that probably screws up the timeline, and it doesn't really make much sense if they take Godzilla out of existence. Well, almost entirely out of existence, but it might have erased Biolante from the timeline. But I still think it makes sense, so I'm going with the first theory.
case, these G cells were swallowed by a black hole, rapidly evolved under extreme gravity during the process of being released from a white hole, assimilated extraterrestrial biocrystalline organisms known as bioquartz, and were, on top of all that, irradiated by cosmic rays from a supernova. The resulting life form took on many of the physical characteristics of Godzilla, with the additional ability to control two types of particles associated with the aforementioned crystalline organisms, gravitons and photons. The Bioquartz monster then set a course for Earth, intent on destroying Godzilla and conquering the planet for himself.
Pretty cool. History.
Space Godzilla was first spotted flying by Saturn, where he destroyed a manned NASA satellite prior to clashing with Moguera in the asteroid belt. Defeating the mecha easily, he soon landed on Birth Island and attacked Little Godzilla. When Godzilla arrived, the space monster quickly overpowered him through use of his Corona Beam
Yep.
and confined Little Godzilla within a crystal cage, abruptly abandoning the battle thereafter. Space Godzilla ventured southwest across Japan, incidentally killing the film's main human villain Dr. Susumu Okubo, and eventually landing in Fukuoka. He surrounded the city with crystals, creating a battle area centered around its giant tower, which would serve as a cosmic antenna to supply him with power. Moguera arrived at the city to battle Space Godzilla again, but was no match for the monster. Before long, Godzilla arrived as well and joined forces with the robot, which soon split into Star Falcon and Land Moguera. The latter unit drilled underground and knocked out the foundations of Space Godzilla's power source, the Fukuoka Tower, while Godzilla toppled the tower from ground level. The tides of battle turned, Moguera recombined and used its spiral grenades to destroy Space Godzilla's shoulder crystals in quick
Yeah.
succession. In retaliation, Space Godzilla impaled and hurled the mecha into a nearby building. Akira Yuki tried to pilot the damaged mech back into battle, colliding with Space Godzilla and knocking the celestial clone down, but the damage to the machine made it almost impossible to control, and it crashed into several buildings where it became completely disabled.
Yep.
Space Godzilla now faced his counterpart hobbled and alone, soon knocked down once more by a shot of atomic breath. Able to tap into the bountiful cosmic energy in the air following the destruction of the space monster's shoulder crystals, Godzilla unleashed 4 blasts of his burn spiral heat
Spiral
ray.
heat ray.
Proving too much for him to cope with, Space Godzilla exploded, and his crystallized remains flew back up into space.
Why did it happen? I don't know. Ability.
The crystals on Space Godzilla's shoulders serve as conduits to absorb and amplify the earthbound cosmic energy which powers him. In particular, the energy generators contained within do as their name suggests, utilizing cosmic energy funneled to them by the crystal shards sticking out of the shoulders, which function as antennae. Meanwhile, numerous crystals embedded within his long tail store this energy. In order
Cosmic
to
energy.
counteract the rapid energy depletion he experiences on Earth, he used Fukuoka Tower as a gigantic antenna and spawned numerous building-sized crystal towers within the city to aid in channeling and serve as energy reserves, creating an energy field or battle area that constantly replenished his energy while within its bounds, bestowing him with limitless power. Space Godzilla
That's pretty cool.
is said to generate special pulses which he can synchronize with brainwaves emitted from the core crystal in his body, essentially his equivalent of a central nervous system and brain, giving him command of gravitons and photons in apparent transcendence of the laws of physics. Telekinesis, in other words. Owed to this is the unrivaled control he exerts over the trajectory of his corona beam, a yellow
I didn't know Space Godzilla was a virus too. His corona beam.
orange energy beam resembling a lightning bolt fired from his mouth. He can freely trace any path for it, allowing it to curve sharply and hit targets from all angles, thus bypassing potential defenses. The beam is able to visibly injure Godzilla, even knocking him to the ground in 2 instances, and later is used to sever one of Mogera's arms. Space Godzilla can further weaponize
Gravity tornado.
gravitons in the form of supergravitational waves or anti-gravity waves known as gravity tornadoes. By converging graviton particles onto a target, he can lift them into the air, rendering them helpless. He was able to effortlessly do so with the 60,000 metric ton Godzilla. Furthermore, Space Godzilla can direct circular waves of electromagnetic radiation called photon hurricanes at opponents. These interfered with Mogera's systems during their first encounter, rendering it inoperable when used in combination with his corona beam. The installation of the new magnetic and electronic countermeasure on the repaired mech was necessary to neutralize the waves. Using his telekinetic and geokinetic powers in tandem, Space Godzilla can raise multiple huge crystals out of the ground, then have them fly through the air towards opponents, or have them rain down from the sky. Though perhaps not the fastest projectiles, they can home in on targets, as their name suggests, making them difficult to dodge. Space G can use his crystals to trap other monsters, of course demonstrated with the trapping of little
Sorry, I'm just looking at the chapters. Okay, yeah, I'm good.
in the movie. This is often demonstrated in comics too, sometimes generating the crystals out of thin air, or even the near vacuum by the moon. One noteworthy incident from Godzilla Rulers of Earth involves him transforming while Gigan's right in his face, forcing Gigan to cut off his own arm to escape. Moreover, the space
Huh. I guess. I guess. I guess Gigan should be renamed Aaron Ralston because he stuck under a rock, or in this case a crystal, and he had to cut off his own arm to escape. Yeah.
Beast uses crystals as melee weapons in the game Godzilla Save the Earth. In the GVSG manga, he uses one to parry and deflect Godzilla's atomic breath, later impaling the Big G in the leg with one, and making it gruesomely expand while embedded. In both Godzilla Unleashed and Save the Earth, he can summon crystal towers that act as turrets, firing off energy at enemies. Space Godzilla can summon a powerful electromagnetic barrier called the Photon Reactive Shield at will to protect himself against incoming energy attacks, including Godzilla's atomic breath.
Like,
Space Godzilla can switch between his flying and combat modes at will by unfurling his variable dorsal crystals. By covering his entire body with crystalline cells and manipulating a large amount of gravitons, the monster can accelerate repeatedly in space to achieve speeds near the speed of light. During high-speed
alright, these abilities are. Wait.
travel, electromagnetic waves generated from the crystalline regions are said to form a vortex-like barrier around his body, shattering obstacles and therefore protecting him from relativistic collisions.
Alright, these abilities are pretty cool, but I think I'm just gonna skip ahead to trivia because I just want to see trivia about them. So, if you don't mind, I'm gonna skip.
Space Godzilla's name is trademarked as one word joined together, just like Mechagodzilla.
Mhm.
However, unlike Mecha G, the G in Space Godzilla is capitalized,
Capital,
whereas the G in Mechagodzilla is
lowercase.
not capitalized. While the two-word space blank Godzilla is used within Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla itself, and plenty of official Japanese media to this day, the camel-cased spelling is more prevalent in English media. Still, there are exceptions here and there, including as recently as Godzilla Battle Line, and the 2024 English translation of Shinji Nishikawa's Godzilla, the Encyclopedia. Some things aren't even consistent with themselves, like Godzilla
Really?
Save the Earth, which uses the two-word spelling within the game, but the camel case spelling in the manual, and Welbeck's 2022 Godzilla, the official guide to the King of the Monsters,
Sorry, my nose is a little stuffy, so forgive me if I'm blowing my nose on camera.
which uses the uppercase G in the main text, but a lowercase g just for the photo captions. How strange is that? But I digress. Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla is not the first time Toho had the idea to give a member of Godzilla's species extraterrestrial
Oh, I
origins.
remember this.
Enter a Space Godzilla. Originally a proposal for a full-fledged film, one of many considered to restart the Godzilla franchise through its unplanned hiatus in the late 1970s, A Space Godzilla was ultimately published as a two-part story with Toho's approval in the February and April 1979 issues of the Japanese edition of Starlog magazine. It begins with the second-generation Godzilla dying of diabetes while carrying her son, Lilin. Humanity discovers she's a female member of an alien race known as the Space Godzillas, and her true name is Roseanne. They convert her body into a spaceship, allowing her to carry Lilin to planet Godzilla, where the little one fights alongside his father Kunin against the evil Sumerian aliens and their leader Gamoni. You know, just your typical Godzilla story. On April 2nd,
Crazy that a Godzilla monster or a Godzilla who's like um really powerful, but then or just like an not necessarily indestructible, but like most powerful monster, and he, or in this case she, was killed by diabetes. That's crazy.
2020, Wizards of the Coast announced their upcoming Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths set would feature characters from the Godzilla franchise. All were special versions of regular cards, whose names were printed beneath each kaiju's. The set's arrival onto shelves in the following weeks would have gone off without a hitch, were it not for one particular card, Space Godzilla's, which was subtitled Corona Beam of Death in Japanese, and Death Corona in English. Needless to say, in light of the COVID 19 pandemic, the card was rechristened with the subtitle Void Invader. However, it
Oh
was
yeah.
too late to change this for the initial printing, so some made it into consumer hands.
So yeah, it's basically my joke from earlier.
As established earlier, Space Godzilla's design recycled that of Super Godzilla's from the 1993 video game. But 30 years later, this would be inverted in a way. See, when Bandai announced in August 2024 that they'd be releasing a movie monster series soft vinyl figure of Super Godzilla from the game, they were upfront on it being a retool of their Space Godzilla figure. Indeed, not only are Space G's dorsal crystals retained, and thus inaccurate to Super Godzilla's sprite art, but still engraved to the bottom of his foot is the katakana for Space Godzilla. Space Godzilla starred in Godzilla Island's very first story arc, introducing Torema, only to be killed by Godzilla and Torema after a one-episode fight. Nonetheless, writer Takahiko Masuda found ways to bring the Crystal King back twice. In Space Godzilla's spirit, Dogora raises his ghost to possess Godzilla and drain the other Earth monsters' auras one by one. King Caesar performs an exorcism with a giant Ofuda, but is too late to stop Space Godzilla from regaining his physical form. He's stronger this time, but not by much. In the story arc, Space Godzilla's spirit again, G-Guard is convinced the spectral kaiju has returned when Gorosaurus turns up comatose and King Caesar's shrine burns down, but he turns out to merely be a hologram set up by the Zillion Randeth. Then it turns out that a monster sporting the amazing name Super Special Space Godzilla High Grade Type 2 is also on the island, having been summoned by the giant Dark Emperor. Silly Emperor, that's not a high grade figure. This Space Godzilla thrashes Godzilla until he's spooked by a giant hologram, courtesy of firefighter jet Jaguar. After Godzilla breaks off one of his shoulder crystals, he floats away, and the villains bicker over whose fault it is. Space Godzilla, or rather Space Godzilla-kun, took a while to show up in Godziban, but when he did, he brought his brothers, Space Manila and Space Little. Landing on Godzi Island, they terrorize Gabara, Gigan, and Anguirus until King Goji-kun throws Space Godzilla-kun, and he's embarrassed further by Space Manila and Space Little getting along just fine with their terrestrial counterparts. They show up at the end of the most recent episode to help the Godzilla family against a terrifying monster army, along with most of the rest of the cast.
Wait, hold on. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. I'm just trying to.
He brought his brothers, Space Manila and Space Little. Landing on Godzi Island, they terrorize Gabara, Gigan, and Anguirus until King Goji-kun throws Space Godzilla-kun, and he's embarrassed further by Space Manila and Space Little getting along just fine with their terrestrial counterparts. They show up at the end of the most recent episode to help the
Okay, look, is that Bagan? It is. If you don't know, Bagan is an unused kaiju, so I'm glad Bagan is in something for once.
Godzilla family against a terrifying monster army, along with most of the rest of the cast. Space Godzilla has featured in over a dozen video games as of 2025, not counting collaborations, with his most notable appearances being as a primary antagonist in the Atari Pipeworks games Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Unleashed. In the former, he's under the control of the Vortac, and is the final opponent in Godzilla 2000's action mode on hard difficulty, where upon defeating him, a true ending cutscene plays, showing him getting sucked in by a black hole. For the sequel, he was no longer under Vortac control, instead leading the Mutants faction. The force behind the global crystal plague, which the game centers around, his meteor shower birthed two brand new monsters, the crystalline creature Crystalak and the volcanic beast Obsidius. In Godzilla Battleline,
Interesting. We need to see those in the MonsterVerse.
Space Godzilla is a
Maybe one of those could be the villain in Godzilla X Kong Supernova. That would be awesome.
Cost 4-star that summons a pair of crystals every 7 seconds. These lose health over time, and boost the attack power of allied units by 25% for 5 seconds when nearby, with the added function of drawing enemies' ire and thus slowing them down. His leader ability, Photon Field, places 6 crystals with the same effect at random spots across the battlefield. Early in 2024, a Fukuoka version of the unit was added to the game, which summons 2 homing ghosts every 8 seconds that fly towards enemies, stalling their advance and dealing damage on contact if not destroyed quickly enough. His Corona Beam attack can hit up to 3 enemies in close proximity, making it decently effective at dealing with groups. Before moving on, a shout out to Horiuchi Hisahiko and Nagashima Hiroyuki, who worked on the soundtrack for Godzilla Generations Maximum Impact. In particular, Space Godzilla's theme, which is used during the intro section of this kaiju. Mogera was close enough to...
Sorry, I'm just skipping ahead a little. Let's go right here. Okay.
5 seconds when nearby spots towards enemy generations maximum impact. In particular, Space Godzilla's theme, which is used during the intro section of this kaiju profile Redux, as well as the original version from 2017. There's been a lot of updates between then and now, but we can't fix what's already perfect. Naturally, the manga adaptation of Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla was the first to feature the space monster. Here, Space Godzilla spreads his crystals by exhaling a stream of crystalline spores, their proliferation far more severe than in the movie. His geokinesis is showcased pretty gruesomely when, after having stuck Godzilla in the leg with a huge crystal, he makes it violently sprout additional shards. With the Monster King seemingly incapacitated, he lets his guard down, only to get impaled by Godzilla using the very crystal he'd been infested with, knocking down Fukuoka Tower in the process. He gets back up and emits a full-body beam at Godzilla, but thankfully, Mogera was close enough to use as a shield. The Big G subsequently fired off a powered up heat ray, which partially melted Space G, then pulled the barbed crystal from his body and rammed it into his cosmic clone, shattering him into pieces. In the Digest manga illustrated by Shinji Nishikawa, Godzilla is the one to destroy his shoulder crystals, subsequently overloading him with energy from his heat rays till he went boom. SpaceGodzilla also takes plenty of L's throughout IDW's Godzilla comics. He appears in all three of the books that comprise the IDW universe, while Kingdom of Monsters just teases him at the end of the final issue. In Godzilla, he comes to Earth with Monster X, Gigan, and Hedorah, devastating London. After fighting off Batra and Titanosaurus, he joins up with Monster X in New York City to take on Godzilla. The battle goes well until Kiryu, who Monster X previously knocked underwater, blasts him with the Absolute Zero cannon, and Godzilla follows that up by shattering his crystals. He retreats into space, where he's no less pleasant, picking a fight with a Cryog ship stationed near the moon in Rulers of Earth. After he easily dismantles multiple Mechagodzilla units, the aliens send out the upgraded Gigan, who manages to drive him off after a vicious fight. The Cryogs soon get their revenge, sending Space Godzilla crashing down to Los Angeles during the Trilopod incursion. He teams up with Godzilla for exactly long enough to destroy the Trilopods based on himself and Megaguirus, then turns on him, but flees when he sees the approaching Trilopod hive in the sky. Space Godzilla stars in two other issues of IDW's first wave, Godzilla the Half Century War number 4 and Godzilla in Hell number 3. He attacks
Wow, these IDW comics sound interesting. I own a few Godzilla IDW comics, I think, but I need to get some more. Specifically these, because they sound pretty awesome.
Bombay in the former, with Godzilla and Mechagodzilla foiling him, and destroys the entire planet, beam locking with Godzilla in Rio de Janeiro in the latter. They soon cross paths again in Hell, where Godzilla's temporary angelic powers lead to the Crystal King's obliteration. IDW's second wave brought Space Godzilla his own double-length one-shot, Godzilla Rivals vs. Space Godzilla.
Whoa.
Alien miners accidentally disturb his slumber inside an asteroid, angering him into attacking their homeworld. As he tears through the military and their pet kaiju Singura, he exposes the fault lines in their heavily stratified society, and eventually their planet's actual fault lines. In the process, he discovers a baby kaiju, who writer-artist Matt Frank has hinted as being related to Crystalak, and immediately crushes it. He also features
That's cold-hearted. Space God, that took a dark turn. Shows you how cold-hearted Space Godzilla is.
in the final issue of Rivals, King Ghidorah vs. Space Godzilla, Godzilla vs. the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 2, where Psycho Blue steals his powers to become Psycho Ranger Space Godzilla, and Godzilla, Here There Be Aliens, where he's part of the Zillion Invasion Force. His next gig will be in Starship Godzilla, per Tim Seeley. Speaking of upcoming Godzilla media,
Oh,
we couldn't end this video without talking about Godzilla Kong Supernova,
yeah.
the next film in the MonsterVerse, and quite possibly Space Godzilla's Hollywood debut. Not only is the title itself a potential allusion to his origin, but actor Matthew Modine made numerous references to Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla on Instagram after he was cast in the film, including a hashtag in a post he later removed. Now, Space Godzilla is certainly a bold choice for a villain, considering his only film barely had theatrical play outside of Japan. And while some actors are cavalier about spoilers, Modine has been on Stranger Things long enough to know better. He could just really like Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla, or engaging in cruel misdirection. We'll find out whenever the Playmates toys leak. But for now, that's all we have on Space Godzilla. Thank you for watching.
Pretty dope video, Wikizilla. Alright guys, that's it for this video. This was an interesting video. I enjoyed it a lot. But yeah, make sure you go subscribe to Wikizilla. Again, the link's in the description. Make sure you also like this video and subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you guys. I'll see you guys next time. Uh, Make sure you like this video and subscribe if you're new. And I'll see you guys next time. Cheers. Bye bye.